Welcome to Next to Madison, a podcast to help you live your best life.
Welcome back to another fun episode of Next to Madison. I'm your host, Madison Malloy, and on this episode, we are talking about the power of storytelling. Storytelling can connect us and create beautiful, long-lasting friendships, and also a way to pass on your legacy and a way to pass on information that can be less controversial or have conversations, opening up conversations to things that are different, pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone. And I'm sitting down with speaker, author, and humanitarian Steve Mann on this very special episode, and he's going to dive into all that. He has a new book coming out that's going to be available June 1st on Amazon and is called The Stories That Shape Us. And this is a episode for everybody, whether you're a public speaker in the public eye, leadership, or you just want to pass on great stories to your younger generations that are going to come after you. The power of a story provides connection, and that's what we are missing so much in today's society, is that we don't know how to really authentically connect with each other. And that's what stories do. So we will be right back after this brief message with our guest on Next to Madison. Stay tuned.
It's your host, Madison Malloy, and I have exciting news. My new product is now available on Amazon called Color Your Way to Abundance, a 21-day manifestation guide for wealth, health, and love. This unique coloring journal will help you manifest by coloring in the affirmations while you continue to repeat them. This will help activate these affirmations so they become a reality. Grab your copy today and relax, color, and start manifesting.
Okay, we are back with our guest of the hour on Next to Madison. We have got speaker, author, and humanitarian Steve Mann. Welcome to the show, Steve. How are you?
I'm terrific. It's great to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you here because we're talking about a very important subject matter today, which is the power of storytelling. And I don't care if you're a creative or a business executive. This is one of those skills that is crucial to have, the power to tell a story. And especially in speaking. Speaking is one of those things they say. I had a speaking coach that told me one time, if you've got 7 amazing stories, you'll be a 7-figure speaker, because it's the power of the story that builds the authenticity and the magic around the narrative. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to let you dive into this. But before we get into that, tell us like your brief background, just so that people know who you are and why they should listen to you.
Okay. Well, quickly, I grew up on a potato farm in Idaho, learned I wanted off that farm, and went to school, started a consulting firm in the San Francisco Bay Area. And as we built the international operation, I started learning a lot about humanitarian activities going around the world. So when we sold that company, I moved back to Idaho so my kids could know their grandparents, and started involving myself in humanitarian work and spent most of the next 30 years doing just that.
Wow.
And so we lived for 6 years in Africa. I spent probably 20 trips to the Philippines. And so I have six children, and at one point we all just took off to Africa, just boom.
Wow.
And to Zimbabwe to see if we could make a difference with HIV/AIDS. And so we've kind of moved around a bit, doing things that hopefully could make a difference. And in that process, I learned a lot about telling stories and the importance of passing on beliefs and traditions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's so true, right? And so, I mean, that's incredible, though, that you were able to take everything you've known here in America and then just uproot your life to a very foreign world, and then dedicate your time to helping people that were less fortunate.
Yeah, well,
It's
I had been traveling with different humanitarian groups for quite a bit. And so I kind of knew what the situations were in various places, but came home one time and went to a meeting that was how to go on a mission to do things to help people. And I turned to my wife and said, well, we can't do that with 6 dependent children, but who cares? Want to go to Zimbabwe and see if we can make a difference? She said immediately, absolutely, let's go. And 5 months later, we were living in Harare with 66 kids,
Oh my
running
gosh.
around the country, seeing where we could do something.
That's amazing. And so what did you guys discover when you were there? Like how were you able to make a difference with the HIV crisis?
You know, it was the early kind of times with HIV. And so the first meeting I went to was a government meeting, and they had people with Kalashnikovs outside reminding us that we weren't allowed to talk to anybody about AIDS because people still didn't want to discuss it.
Yeah.
So I went around the country trying to go to everything I could, and finally decided that with my skills and what I knew, the best thing I could do was try to help kids, junior high, high school, even grade school, know what they can do to prevent themselves from getting AIDS. That was a time about 38% of all the adults in Zimbabwe were HIV positive. That meant they were dead in about 5 years. There were no treatments. There were no antiretrovirals. And so prevention really was the best option. And for me, particularly to help youth be able to protect themselves.
So, and we've come so far with that, but that's amazing. Did you ever feel scared that you would contract it somehow?
No, I never did. You know,
Yeah.
I had read a lot about AIDS, and I knew kind of how it was contracted and how it wasn't contracted. And so that was never a concern of mine. Most of my issues there were trying to work through with the government and different agencies, permissions to go teach a program in schools. And that took a lot of work. And then, of course, we had to design the program and design it in a way that could be spread. And but we went all through Zimbabwe and through much of Southern Africa.
Wow. And then how old were your kids when you were there?
Let's see, the oldest were in college, so they went home. And then we had one in high school, one middle school, and two in grade school.
Wow. And so how do you feel that that experience that you decided to take on impacted them?
Well, they were kind of excited when we first went, some of them. It's hard to take high school kids out of high school.
Yes.
And so there was a little grumpiness there,
Yeah.
but they ended up making a lot of friends, and we had to do some work to get schools figured out. But today, they all do talk about it as having been an incredible experience and
Oh,
changed their lives.
that's amazing. And what kind of line of work did they all end up in?
All over the place.
Yeah, yeah.
One daughter, her husband is a builder in Amarillo. One works for BYU and training leadership to students.
Okay.
One is in PR.
Okay.
So they're kind of all over the place.
Yeah, all of it. But they sounded like they had a great experience and it was a positive impact.
Yeah, my two youngest went back to Africa another time when I was serving as a mission president for the Church of Jesus Christ. And so they're both Black, my youngest kids, and one of them ended up spending 6, 7, 8, 9 years in Africa. So there was a point where he had spent more time in Africa than he had in the United States.
Yeah, that's amazing. So are some kids adopted that you had?
Yes.
That's amazing. That's amazing. It's such a great story. Okay, so thank you for sharing that. And then you wrote a book. Tell us about the book.
Well, I did. I just got the final edit back today.
Okay.
We hope to have it on Amazon June 1st.
Excellent. Congratulations. What's it gonna,
Thank you.
tell us about the book. Why should we go and run and buy it?
Well, the title is Stories That Shape Us.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a guide to helping people tell their stories to their grandchildren and great grandchildren as a means to pass on their own values and traits and the things that they see are important.
Yeah.
And the reason is, I think today, in today's world, kids and adults get lots and lots of information from the internet and from social media, but often we don't pass on the kind of humanness of the information. We don't pass on why it's important, the perspective, and they don't have a sense of belonging. It's just this big pack of information. And, that's not the way we used to do things. We used to always tell stories to pass on our culture. And so this kind of brings that back and teaches people how to use stories to sit down and talk to their kids, grandkids, and if they do it in a written form, even great grandkids who they don't know. But to share their traits, beliefs, principles that they feel are important by telling stories. You don't sit down with a 7-year-old and say, okay, I would like to talk to you today about prejudice and discrimination. That would go nowhere. But if you can tell some stories, then they say, wow, okay, tell me more. Can I give you an example of that?
Sure.
When I was talking to my grandson who is 7, and I was telling him some stories about his uncles, my 2 youngest boys who are Black. And I was telling him how they would sometimes be followed home from school by the police.
Oh.
And he would look at me and go, Grandma, well, that's dumb. Why would they do that? And so we ended up in quite a long discussion, and he didn't want to leave it. So the next morning he brought it up with his family. And we had another discussion on race and discrimination and people in general. But it only happened because we were telling stories.
Yeah.
And so in the book, I outline traits and principles that are important to me, and then kind of illustrate them by telling stories. And but I also encourage the reader, as they're reading these stories and talking to people, to write down their own stories and to identify their own traits and beliefs that they think are important.
Yeah, and just the power of, because stories allow people to connect and use their imagination and almost put themselves into the situation, right? Like a book
Exactly.
on stage or a book with somebody, right? You're giving them like a live version.
Yeah.
And I think because you're a speaker, one of the most powerful things in speaking, particularly, even if you're talking about, let's say, building confidence or removing self-sabotage or even leadership, whatever it is, you can't just go up there and spit a bunch of facts because it's hard for them to connect. And then you're just spitting a bunch of facts. And until you kind of hit those heartstrings, like with a story, and that's like the power of storytelling. Like if you look at some of the greatest
Yeah.
speeches, they'll say, a story of how self-sabotage was destroying their lives and how one morning, but really describing it is so key. And especially if you're wanting to connect with younger generations whose attention span is close to zero because of all the stuff coming at them, it's got to be through a story. And I think it's such a great way to teach the youth about obviously principles and values and legacy and things of that sort. But it's a more fun way to connect with everybody. I'd rather somebody tell me a story than just spit a bunch of facts.
Well, I think we all would. But, in our society, what we have kind of come to is we're getting more and more polarized, partly because the algorithms on social media push us to one side or the other.
Yeah.
And pretty soon we find we can't talk to our own family. We can't talk to friends about important issues. We'll talk about food, sports, something like that, but we never talk about, well, what do you think about Social Security and what's happening? Or what do you think about the situation in Bosnia or in the situation in with what Russia is doing right now? We just don't do that because we're afraid we're going to offend somebody.
Yeah.
But if we can tell a story, So tell me more about that. How did you get into that? And then it leads to that discussion.
Yeah.
Um, there's actually a bonus chapter in the book that people can download about specifically about talking to your friends and family about controversial issues. Because
Wow.
I think as a society, we need to relearn how to do that.
And
If we're
respect
ever
each
going
other's
to,
differences.
yeah, if we're
Yeah.
ever going to find a way to come together, we have to learn to
Yeah.
talk and listen.
Oh, 100%. No, that's going to be very needed because here's the thing is, people are raised differently. They have different values. They come from different backgrounds. And just because you're on the right doesn't make you right, or if you're on the left, it doesn't make you right. It's your opinion and it's respecting people's differences and values instead of immediately hating them because they don't agree with you. And you can thank the good old-fashioned media for that. They're the problem. Nothing changes until they change, or everyone in my I tell everybody to shut the shit off. Um, but some people are still tuning in, and then they wonder why their dark cloud is hanging over them. I said, well, hey, I looked out the
Yeah,
window. It's a sunny day. Everything's great in my world. I don't know. I don't watch the news. I know what
yeah,
needs to go on. I know how to do it for making money and markets, but the rest of it is irrelevant because they're pushing fear. Fear controls people and they're pushing controversy. So they're dividing a wedge in between people. And at the same time, it's like I always tell people, like, step back and realize we are all God's creation and we're all equal. And we're
yeah,
all in this crazy life of nobody has it figured out. And that's why we're here, is so we can learn and evolve and grow. And nobody's better than the other person, or nobody's right, nobody's wrong. It's just this whole thing of like adding value and being kind and yeah, having that conversation. But I think people are afraid to have the conversation because they're like, oh, well, this person's, a liberal. Like, how can I have a conversation with them without them coming at me and screaming and telling me I'm the worst person on the planet, or vice versa?
yeah.
So it's it's a messed up world. Thanks, media and government.
But we've kind of let them do that to us.
We
Um,
have, which is why I say it's the power of clicking it off. But I like this power of storytelling, where it's like, hey, we're all in this together. What if, did we ever stop and think that maybe it was the government way back in the 60s
you
that
know,
decided
go
to
ahead.
divide us and control us? And you and I are both in this together. Remember that time when that's, I think, where the magic of the story could be.
Well, and I think stories give us perspective. You think back in the 60s, I went to a Black Lives Matter march.
Okay.
This is some time ago. And then I started hearing after that from some of my friends, oh, the world's coming apart. Look at these people marching all over and doing this. I'm saying, where were you in the 70s? We were burning down cities.
Oh,
We were
yeah,
taking over
that's
universities. This is nothing. And if they look at American history, we have always been a contentious society, but
yeah.
we have worked it through every time when we learn to talk to each other. And
Yes.
but it comes and goes in waves. And I think we're at one of those where it's time for us to come back
Yeah.
and take control of our lives and take control of our government. And we do that through talking.
Yes. But I think everyone's too afraid to talk.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
you
just
know
so sad.
you're right. I belong to a little group. It's empty nesters. We're mostly in our 70s and 80s. And we have different speakers come and musicians, and they just talk to our little group. And so I put out the idea, and this is a group of people. I mean, there are nuclear physicists or geneticists or all kinds of background, lived all over the world. So I said, well, what would you think about maybe one of these weekly meetings? We pick a topic today and just talk about it. No way. We might offend somebody. Not going to do that. And so once the book is out, I'm going to send them all a copy and say, read this chapter and bring that up again. Couldn't we follow these ground rules and have one of these conversations? Um,
I love that. And I think a great way too to like start that is realizing that like no matter what, like in order for you to grow and evolve as a human, you have to push yourself outside your comfort zone. Like your dreams and everything with you dies in the comfort zone. So
Yeah,
people don't want to have the uncomfortable things, right? They don't want to push themselves, but everything happens in the uncomfortable zone.
yeah.
So that could be a good way to be like, hey, the more you step outside of this and live outside of your comfort zone, the better off and better of a person you're going to be.
I had a terrific teacher in graduate school. And what we do in this class is in one week, we take a subject like environmentalism, and we take all the pros. And then the next week, we take all the cons and
Ah,
divide them. Then we take another issue, pros and cons. And he invited me in at the end of class. He said, well, Steve, what did you think of the class? And I said, well, I loved the class, but I also hated it. And he said, well,
yeah.
why did you hate it? And I said, because I love being passionately devoted to a cause. And when I understand both sides, it's harder to do that. And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, Steve, that's the role of the educated man, to keep the two sides from killing each other while you work through solutions. And,
Yeah.
I think that's the role of a peacemaker, and which is why it's so hard and we have so few peacemakers. But if we only listen to our side, we can't come together.
That's what happens.
And, we do that with political ideologies, but we also do that with color, with ethnicity, and everything. I've just had the great privilege of living around the world and dealing with people of all kinds of religions and cultures and ethnicities, and
Yeah.
they're all the same. And yet we're so afraid of anybody who's a little different than we are that we don't talk to them.
It's true, yeah. And that's where we need, because it's like, yeah, we may look different, we may think different, we may believe different things, but at the end of the day, like we're all the same. Our bodies work the same, they function the same. We
Yep.
came to this planet the same freaking way,
We have the
and
same
it's
hopes and dreams. We have the same fears. We want the
yeah.
best for our children.
Right. That's what I say. Everybody really wants the same thing. They just have a very different way of getting there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and but I think that's like the true power of awareness is like once you realize like okay, like we are all the same, even the billionaires going through struggles, even the poor person goes through struggles. We all have our struggles, right? So like to put people, from the beginning of time we had a class system, right? The super rich and then the super poor. And that's just the way it was. And I think we had this ideology thing where people were saying, okay, because they're this, they're better. And I think it's gotten more smoothed out now because so many people have so much money too, to where it's like we're all just doing the best we can. And I think when you have that attitude of like nobody has it figured out, nobody, not one person on this planet actually really knows what they're doing. They just don't. And
Well,
that's when we
wait a
pass
minute.
on and then and God tells us, you got it all wrong, but welcome home.
I came on this podcast because I thought you had it all figured out.
No, because I'm human being. I have a lot figured out, but we definitely don't have it all figured out. I don't think we were intended to figure it out because we have to
I don't
grow
either.
until we die. And if we
Exactly.
figured it all out, then the growth stops, and then that's when your life stops.
And that's why we're all here. But
Yeah.
we have become afraid to do that. And we've got to find
Oh,
ways to break down things. They don't, many, many years ago, I had been on a little march with my wife from the train station in Boise, Idaho, down to the Capitol. And I was asked to give a talk at the end of this march. And it was kind of a cold December day, and it was getting dark. And so I'm standing on the steps of the Capitol. And I remember one thing I said was, look, we don't all need to go out and start a foundation or make huge contributions or even march for that matter. But the one thing I would like everybody to consider is when you see somebody, a different religion, a different color, a different ethnicity, instead of being afraid and turning away, go over and say hi and introduce yourself. I think if we could all just do that one thing, a lot of the fear and anxiety would go away.
Outside of the comfort zone again. That's where
Yep.
that's where true light happens, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into the storytelling. How
Okay.
does one master telling a story? What's involved in a great story?
Well, and I'm thinking here not of professional storytellers or speakers, but the average person. The first thing is you have to have some faith in yourself. If you ask somebody, well, tell me some stories. Well, I don't have any. Well, what are things you've done that are important? Well, nothing. And because most people first haven't really sat down and said, what are the things that are important to me? They haven't clarified the
Yeah.
traits or the beliefs or the
Yeah.
principles that are important to them. Well, if they can do that, then I start asking, well, why? How did that come to be important to you? What do? They start telling me stories. Well, it happened because here, and then later on in life, this happened. I said, you're just now telling me stories that you didn't think you had.
So it's almost like
And
find the important questions.
find the important questions. So, people come at it differently. I ask them to go back at different times in their life and tell me stories from there. I
Yeah.
ask them to go back to different controversies or problems they've had and tell me stories from there. And pretty soon they start. I said, now write those down. And I was talking with a guy just the other day, and he was telling me this incredible story of growing up in Las Vegas in the 50s when Las Vegas was very, very segregated. And at 16, he was sent by his father to work for his uncle, who lived in the black side of town and had a company that washed things and sheets and pillowcases for the hotels. And all of a sudden, he was the only white guy in an area. And he tells me this incredible story of getting acquainted with his boss and going to his boss's home. And a guy who he didn't really like suddenly understand what this guy was sacrificing to try to keep a job and protect his family. He said, changed my whole life. I said, well, have you written that down anywhere? He said, no, not important. I said, well, wait a minute. Somewhere down there, maybe a great great grandson who you will never know might be struggling with this idea. But if they could find your story,
Oh, yeah.
that might give them a whole different perspective
Yeah.
of that whole aspect of life. And it would
Absolutely.
mean something to them because it came from their great grandfather. It's something they can relate to. It's part of them.
Yeah.
And I don't dwell in the book so much about the technical parts of storytelling. I just try to get people talking using stories. Some of the stories I have in the book are embarrassing. Some of them are stupid.
Yeah.
Some of them, the kid's going to say, Grandpa, why did you ever do that? Others force people to listen and think. But the key is to start with that story, whatever it is, then draw conclusions, and that leads to a conversation.
It's so true. Yeah. And the story. So is there like exercises in the book though that'll kind of help people guide them to start creating their stories?
Yeah, after each story, I ask what I call reflection questions. What do you think when you read this?
Yeah.
What ideas does it bring to mind? What stories do you have that do this? Is this important to you? Then when I get to the end of each trait, I give a number of things they could do to study that trait further. And then I have them write down, what would you like to do? Who could you do that with? And as a means to try to get them to explore a little further their own traits, their own beliefs, and at the same time building stories. My hope is if they go through the book the way I try to get them to, that they'll actually end up with a resource book of their own that they
Yeah.
can use to tell stories to grandchildren, great grandchildren. In fact, they'll have the basis for writing their own book if they want to.
Yeah.
But it becomes sort of a resource book for them.
I love that. Yeah, and just the power of storytelling. Like, I'm a speaker, you're a speaker, so we understand the importance of stories. But I think it's just like even if you're, the owner of your company or, in a leadership position, telling stories help you organically and authentically connect to people. And when you can connect to your employees, they're going to do a better job for you. You know
Quick.
what I mean? Like
Oh
when
yeah,
people like and they feel motivated and they feel heard, and you can do that through the power of a story, you're
I had
going
a.
to have a bigger ROI. It's just
That's
the
right.
way it goes.
I had an experience once in Singapore. I was trying to find somebody who could represent our company, and I found this great guy. And we go to dinner at night, and I see him uh, kind of tears in his eyes. He's got the New York Times, and I go, what's wrong?
Yeah.
And he said, well, look at this headlines. Look at what you're doing over there. You've got riots going on. You've got inflation. You've got all kinds of things. He said, don't you realize that you are our hope to be free and have a democracy? And I had this long conversation with him about my thoughts and my stories about being an American. And I kind of left that saying, I hope what I'm telling him is true.
Yeah.
Because I told him that we're a democracy, and democracy is the first out there with everything, and we make mistakes.
Yeah.
But eventually, because we're a democracy, we find solutions and work that through. And we did. We came out of that situation in the 70s back then, in the 80s. But I couldn't have sat down with him and started quoting facts and data. We just have a data battle. But by hearing my personal stories of growing up in America and what I thought we were doing, we related. We could talk to each other. Now it was human to human, not this American versus this Singaporean.
Yeah.
And it's that way too in a company. I've had a number of companies, and there are always threats and problems that come up with any company. And if all you do is go out there and give edicts to people or throw data at them, not much changes. But if you can go out there and maybe tell a story that you've just had in trying to work through a problem, or a story of what somebody else in the company has gone through, then they start understanding and can relate to it.
Yeah.
And then you can discuss things.
Yeah, no, it is so true. Yeah, and it's just I remember going to I was a stand-up comedian for years and years, and I still do it. But, the power of storytelling went back to that. I mean, you kind of start, when you're first starting out, there's a lot more quicker hitter jokes.
Yeah.
But when you really can get into the story and get comfortable with that silence, but then it's like transferring into the speaking world, that was a whole nother animal for me. But really being able to be vulnerable and open up about, and I remember like being at a seminar, I think I was in Acapulco at some guy's villa who was teaching business leaders about speaking. And it was the power of like a story. But it was
Yeah.
amazing how he would stop us, and he's like very intense, but he would be like, what did it smell like? What did the room look like? Were the windows open? What did you look like? Was your hair a mess? Were you crying? Were you fat? Were you skinny? And I was like, oh my gosh. He's like, we need detail.
Yeah.
And it was tough. But the thing is, at the end of the day, you remember you have such sensory in the story that people can actually, while they're hearing it, and this is what makes a great story that and you probably agree with this, is that they can put themselves into the situation while they're listening.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. The more sensory perception you can put into it, the
Yeah.
better.
Oh,
But
yeah.
even if you can't very much, um, one of my first assignments as a new graduate out of organization behavior, I was working with a semiconductor company. and I was their organization behavior consultant. And we had a group of engineers and a group of people who ran the machines on the factory floor. They couldn't stand each other. And every time the engineers would invent a new machine, it wouldn't work when they got it out on the floor. So I said, okay, here's the deal. I want you to give me 3 times where we're going to come together while you're developing this machine. And we're going to talk. Neither side wanted to do that. Engineers won't listen to me. They don't have anything to say.
Yeah.
Come on, 3 times. So we get together the first time, and the workers wouldn't say a word. It was just silent. They listened to the engineers going through their data and said nothing. The engineers said, see, I told you. I said, no, we said 3 times. So they get together the second time. This time the workers just unloaded on the engineers, told them how crummy they were and what they had done to them and how they never listened and nothing ever happened. The engineers didn't like that either. So we get together the third time. By that time it was, well, tell us about this machine you're creating. What is it supposed to do? Well, how would it work like this? And they start working together.
Wow.
And when that new machine came out, the very first week it operated at 125% of capacity.
Wow.
Because they understood each other and they listened to each other.
Yeah, no, that's an incredible thing. And it's so true. Like so much more gets done when the lines of communication, relationships get better, products get better, machines get better.
Yeah.
Everything gets better. So we need to encourage each other to start listening. And if you can connect with people through the power of a story, that's even better. So tell us like where people can find more information about you, connect with you, all that stuff. Do you have LinkedIn, social media? I know your new book is going to be available June 1st. So if you're listening to this before June 1st, bookmark it. If you're listening to it after June 1st, go buy it.
That's right. Before I started doing this, I had no social media presence at all. But you know my son, Jeff.
Yeah.
And so Jeff has created a social media presence for me.
Jeff is amazing. Jeff's a big social media PR guy. He's great.
Yeah. And so I have stuff now on, all kinds of media. I think we started with Instagram, but we're kind of keeping people up to date and talking about things that will be in the book. And we just launched a website. It's steve-mann.com. Pretty easy to remember.
I love it. Okay.
It's not all put together yet, but you can go on it. And as we get closer, we'll announce, prices and when it'll be available and, things that are coming up with the book.
Okay, perfect. So yes, go to that website, you guys, check him out. Make sure you order his book, The Stories That Shape Us. This is important for all generations because as we continue living, we have more stories to tell. And
exactly.
Get outside of your comfort zone because nothing happens in the comfort zone and have those hard conversations, right?
Right.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining me on Next to Madison and sharing this important topic of conversation, which is really the power of storytelling and creating connections and connecting and learning and opening the doors to things we're uncomfortable doing that shape us, right? And thank you to everybody who is listening wherever you may be. We'll see you next time to find out who's next.
Hey, your host here, Madison Malloy. Please make sure to subscribe to the show on all podcast platforms and please rate and review us on iTunes and Spotify. Also, if you have any questions or comments, you can email us at contact@nexttomadison.com. I thank you again for listening. Bye.